welcome to Sparks of History, Professor Jonathan Sarna of Brandeis University, author of Lincoln and the Jews, and today's preeminent historian of American Jewry, joins us. Thank you so much, Professor Sarna.
Delighted to be with you again.
Professor Sarna, just your take on the current alarming rise in anti-Semitism, and especially what we're witnessing on the elite and other college campuses today.
So you're quite right that I think it comes as a surprise to many American Jews. When you look just at the year 2000, a book came out called The Death of American Anti-Semitism, and it talked about a kind of post-anti-Semitism America. Many people believed that anti-Semitism in America was like the old battles of the Catholics and the Protestants and would now just be a matter of history. So the events of the last few years, and I think it's important to move before the most recent outbursts, but they've come as a shock. We first saw something going on the right at Charlottesville, right outside the University of Virginia. It was, I think, 2016. And people were saying Jews will not replace us. Most Jews had no idea what even this was about. It was, of course, the so-called white replacement theory, the fear the Jews were behind the coming of people of color. And there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Charlottesville, including people marching at the synagogue. And that was followed by the terrible events in Pittsburgh, which was a great shock to the American Jewish community. Was the most deadly anti-Semitic incident in American Jewish history. But I will say that in both cases, because they came from the right, there was a sense on the part of some people, well, we've always known that the radical right was problematic, and they have to be watched. Those who paid attention to subsequent events, especially those on the East Coast, might have noted that actually there was several events in Brooklyn that came from people of color, and then you had Colleyville, Texas, which really was kind of Islamist. And there were more and more of these incidents year by year. Still, I think nothing prepared the community for the onslaught of what happened in the wake of October the 7th. First of all, I think Jews did not realize how much their neighbors, whatever they may have thought, their neighbors linked Jews, Israel, they're all the same. If we don't like what Israel's doing, so we don't like Jews. But more than that, Jews saw the worst, most horrific attack on Jews since the Holocaust, which means most American Jews never saw something like that. That is, most American Jews today are born after 1945, and they thought, And indeed, after they heard the president of the United States call this sheer evil, they thought everybody would agree that it was sheer evil. And lo and behold, that didn't happen. Instead, especially, but not exclusively on college campuses, there was pushback. Well, you have to look at context. They deserve it. Maybe it didn't happen at all, and Israel made it up. 100 excuses, attacks, real attacks on Jews on some college campuses, and a great many Jews witnessing various marches and demonstrations that support Hamas. Naturally, given what Hamas did, those Jews became terrified. And we have seen that on many campuses, perhaps, and campuses that Jews know well: Harvard, Columbia, Cornell. Indeed, in Cornell, the Jewish community was threatened with the very same acts, as if one glories in murder, rape, pillage, and so forth, and kidnapping. To their surprise, on many campuses, administrators issued statements that seemed to equivocate. We don't like anti-Semitism. We don't like Islamophobia. Bad things happened on both sides, as if there was a kind of moral equivalence, or the administration said nothing at all. And this, too, greatly worried the Jewish community. Now, it is worth and important, I think, to point out that there are really three types of colleges and universities among the hundreds and hundreds in the United States in terms of the response. First of all, you have those which Jews know well, where suddenly they no longer felt safe. You then have other colleges that came out in Israel's favor. There was a big ad in the Wall Street Journal signed by many colleges and universities, most of them Christian colleges, but also the Yeshiva University, Touro College, Brandeis University. We stand with Israel. That doesn't mean that nothing bad happens on such a campus, or no student says something that angers others, but at least the administration came down strongly. And we know that there are many Christian colleges, Catholic and evangelical, where Jews feel very safe. And then you have a lot of colleges, more than we realize, where it's all that students can do to try and keep up with their classes and whatever jobs they're holding. We don't hear from those colleges, but I actually did contact someone, and she said, thank God we're long been an apolitical campus. Our students are often first generation. They're just trying to make ends meet and finish their degree requirements. Nothing is going on, and we should remember that, because it's too easy to imagine every college is a problem. They're not, and parents can certainly investigate. But at the end of the day, the colleges and universities that Jews have most wanted their children to go to, often their parents went there, have become universities where Jews feel a lot less safe than they once did, and I would include in that Yale University, where I did my own PhD, where the head of Hillel sent around a long, very sad letter in which he more or less said, we don't feel that the administration is defending us and speaking out for us. All of that is new. It bespeaks a growing gap between progressive elements, I put that word in quotes, some of whom have bought into post-colonial theory, and Jews who now discover that they are the victims. At a deeper level, universities have become more frightened either of issuing real statements about morality, the way the president did, or about judging certain kinds of issues. And many universities had trouble with the idea that white male Jews, people whom they always had assumed were the quote oppressors, were suddenly victims. Fortunately, and this is very recent, and admittedly I had something to do with it, the Civil Rights Office of the United States sent what is called a Dear Colleague letter to American colleges and universities, reminding them that Title VI of the Civil Rights Bill requires that they ensure that there is no intimidation and harassment of minorities. Jews are included there, and that they risk losing federal funds if they are found not to be opposing or are not to be doing anything about intimidation, harassment, discriminatory practices on their campuses. And of course, that made a difference for the simple reason that no college can live without federal funds. And we've seen in the last week and a half sleepy administrators who tried hard to hide suddenly deeply interested in what they can do and how they can reassure the government that they are indeed fighting campus anti-Semitism. In some cases, this has empowered administrators to do certain things that they would not have been willing to do before.
Professor Sarna, when you talk about funding, there's been a lot of chatter about foreign funding, especially in the elite Ivy League schools. You know, the Jewish Bible, the Torah tells us in Exodus 23:8, you shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe will blind the clear-sighted. Can universities take billions of dollars from terror-supporting countries like Qatar and remain objective? Is that possible? Is that a factor here?
Well, we have seen certainly some universities, including Harvard, that an Ivy League especially, where that seems to be a factor. Nobody really knows where the money is behind, say, Students for Justice in Palestine. There is a lot of evidence that while we weren't looking, there was a concerted plan to kind of take over the universities and plant people there and fund them who would promote the Hamas line. Gary Wexler, who actually is in the advertising business, talked about meeting the individual who told him about that plan 2 decades ago, and he now realizes that they were quite successful. I expect that there will be further investigation of where the money comes, but it's worth remembering it took more than 50 years to prove that Father Coughlin, the anti-Semitic radio priest in the late 30s, early 1940s, was funded by Goebbels and was directly a pawn of the Nazis. And it took many decades before it was proven that communists in the United States were funded by Stalin, and the Venona documents prove that. So I don't think we should expect that we'll know tomorrow where the money comes from, but I do think that when the money is properly traced, we will discover that, as it so often does, it made an impact. Obviously, there's also Jewish money at many universities, and especially at the best universities. We have seen at Penn, at Yale, at Harvard, elsewhere, donors threatening to cut off that money. And it'd be interesting to see what happens. In some cases, clever administrators have said, oh, well, give us the money and we'll create a center for the study of anti-Semitism. I'm not certain that that will turn out to be a magic wand. I do think that if the government follows through, just because of the power of the United States government, then things can happen, and there is now a hotline to encourage students to report anti-Semitism, intimidation, harassment, so that there will be a very clear set of reports that can be presented, and that will, I hope, have an impact.
Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Are American Jews scared and frightened? I mean, here in Israel, it's a whole different, where we got, it's frightening for the reasons, of the war, and we're looking at America and saying, wow, is this real? Is this undercurrent of anti-Semitism popping out? How scared? And what should American Jews do? Are you pessimistic, optimistic?
I think no, especially young Jews who never experienced it, never expected to experience it. And they're frightened for 2 reasons. There is a kind of immediate fear, will there be some kind of attack? And there have been several hundred incidents of different kinds that have been reported. Even on my Brandeis campus, there was a demonstration, and students reported being petrified. The police told them to stay inside because no one wanted a confrontation. In the end, some of the demonstrators were arrested, but still, this happened in pure sight. It's not what people expect. It frightens them. But at a deeper level, I think we're seeing a very different fear. And the fear is that a worldview has been shaken. Um, uh, Jews thought that they had allies, and they feel betrayed. And just like a spouse who feels betrayed, it's a terrible feeling. It's a trauma. And Jews feel that they are being betrayed by people whom they thought they knew. The New York Times ran a front page article that Gershon Basket felt betrayed. Someone on the extreme left. You multiply that by many people. Jews had been big supporters of environmental action, and indeed it should perhaps be supported. But Greta Thunberg, whom they thought was a great hero, turned against them. Jews had supported Black Lives Matter. It turned against them. And so on and so forth. I think there is very considerable fear. It seems to me that once the war dies down, some of the immediate fear may disappear. People will move on to something else. But there will, I believe, be long-term implications. This is a turning point, just like 1881 was a turning point. The Six-Day War was a turning point. This will be seen as a turning point. And life afterwards will be different. One cannot sketch out now everything that will happen, but I'm reasonably certain that historians will look back and say people's lives changed on October the 7th, and were not quite ever the same again. I've certainly heard from students who feel they'd like to make Aliyah. And it will be interesting to see how large a group that is. Many Jews, I think, feel that more attention has to be paid to Jewish unity. We have to come together, forget about petty disputes, very parallel to things that are being heard in Israel. Rabbis report that synagogues are much more crowded than they had previously been on the weeks after Jewish holidays. In the past, there was a sense the Almighty heard a lot from us on the holidays. Now it's getting cold, we stay home, and suddenly Jews want to be in each other's company, and not just in synagogues. I think that part of what was going on the March on Washington was that sense of Jews wanting to be with other Jews, and that feeling of coming together. And it really extended from J Street on the left to Hasidim on the right. That was remarkable. And people went there in part to experience that coming together. And that's why there was a lot of joy there, even though there was also a lot of sadness. The joy was, how wonderful it is after at such times to know that the people we can depend on are our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community. We've discovered we can't depend much on other people, but our fellow Jews are there for us. Look at them. And although we've heard a lot about young Jews abandoning Israel, anyone who looks at that crowd sees plenty of young Jews who supported Israel. I think we are likely to hear a lot less about, oh, I'm anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic. I think anyone who's paid even remote attention sees that Hamas viewed Jew and Zionist and Israeli as synonyms. And one hopes that some of those debates about defining anti-Semitism and can an anti-Zionist still be pro-Jewish will give way to more substantial discussions about the nature of anti-Semitism, even in a place like America, about combating it, about promoting Jewish unity, and above all, about uniting in defense of Israel.